In 1993, a man was discovered drowned during a solo fishing expedition on Lake Maurepas in Louisiana. The incident was classified as an accident, and the case was sealed. The only personal possession, a custom-crafted gold timepiece, was never found. 6 years afterward, his sibling, while vacationing, spotted the identical watch on the wrist of her brother's widow's new spouse. That solitary observation was sufficient to reactivate everything. On the dawn of May 15, 1993, Lake Maurepas in Livingston Parish, Louisiana, appeared ordinary for 35-year-old Deshaun Harris. It was intended to be a standard Saturday angling excursion, one of numerous he had undertaken alone. He had developed the practice of departing early, launching his compact vessel into familiar waters, and spending hours in the isolated sections of the lake. The spots he favored were distinguished by narrow channels and reed-bordered passages where watercraft traffic was minimal. He was recognized by associates and neighbors as someone who cherished solitude on the water and regarded fishing as both entertainment and contemplation. As twilight approached, his absence became noticeable. By late evening, his spouse, Nia Williams, arrived home and observed that her husband had not returned. She contacted law enforcement from their dwelling, expressing her concern and requesting help. The call was documented as a missing person at risk on the water, which initiated a standard search procedure. The initial response mobilized officers from the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office, subsequently joined by units from the Louisiana State Police. The search commenced overnight with restricted visibility, but continued with full intensity the following morning. Rescue vessels, airboats, and a helicopter were coordinated to cover both open water and reed-dense perimeters. Weather conditions were characteristic for mid-May: moderate winds, rippling waves, and cloudy skies, none of which indicated severe weather, but adequate to create instability for a solitary fisherman. Before we continue deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd appreciate hearing from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Within hours, search teams discovered Harris's small boat, capsized. Floating near a cluster of reeds inside were his fishing rod, tackle box, and a cooler. The hull displayed minor scratches consistent with impact against natural debris or reeds, nothing that suggested intentional damage or collision with another craft. Although the discovery of the boat occurred relatively swiftly, Harris himself was not retrieved that day. Divers and shoreline searchers combed the immediate vicinity but found nothing. Only on May 17th, 2 days later, did search teams locate his body at a moderate distance from the site where the boat had been recovered. The position of the corpse suggested drift caused by wind and water currents. Personal documents, such as his identification card and wallet, remained intact, although some small items were absent. Most significantly, the wristwatch he habitually wore was missing, a detail noted in the recovery report but not considered significant. The autopsy verified drowning as the cause of death. A minor contusion was identified on the right temple, a superficial bruise without fracture and without signs of repeated trauma. The medical examiner concluded the injury was consistent with accidental impact against the side of the boat during a fall. Pulmonary findings, including fluid in the lungs and frothy discharge, aligned with classical features of drowning. Toxicology screens revealed no alcohol or substances that could explain a sudden incapacitation. Collectively, the evidence fit a profile of accidental immersion rather than assault. Investigators reconstructed the probable sequence. Harris may have lost balance while repositioning himself in the boat, struck his head, fallen into the water, and been unable to recover. The overturned vessel was presented as corroboration. At the procedural level, the investigation was handled according to standard operating practices. Deputies documented the recovery site, cataloged personal effects, and coordinated with the coroner's office. Reports were filed and cross-checked, then submitted to the parish records archive. The inquiry extended to the immediate circle of the victim. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed no active disputes or threats. A neighbor reported seeing Nia's vehicle parked in the driveway that evening, reinforcing her statement that she had been home in 1993. That observation served as a sufficient alibi in the absence of contradicting evidence. Investigators noted the existence of a substantial life insurance policy valued at $80,000, signed in March 1993. The policy was flagged for review by the insurer's Special Investigations Unit. Over several weeks, the company conducted standard fraud screening, examining medical history, application materials, and financial background. They identified no irregularities or misrepresentations. After the statutory waiting period, the payout was released to Nia 6 months later. While some investigators privately considered unresolved elements, such as the missing watch, these were judged insufficient to justify reclassification. Missing personal items were common in water recovery cases, and a disappearance of jewelry was not rare. With no witness reports, no forensic indicators of struggle, and no contradictory medical findings, the official determination remained accidental drowning. The case was formally closed, and records were filed as a concluded incident. For law enforcement, the matter represented a completed cycle: report, search, autopsy, and classification. No further investigative leads existed, and jurisdictional procedures were satisfied. The file was transferred to the archive, where it remained for years, without revision. After the funeral and the insurance settlement, Nia sold the family home and relocated to Atlanta, Georgia. She explained her relocation as a decision to rebuild her life in a new environment, away from reminders of the tragedy. Neighbors and extended family interpreted the move as understandable. The change of residence placed her outside the immediate geography of the parish, and any lingering suspicions faded in the absence of contrary evidence. By the end of 1993, all formal avenues had been exhausted. The case was archived alongside many other water-related fatalities, categorized under unintentional drowning. The narrative seemed consistent with natural hazards, unpredictable conditions, sudden imbalance, and human vulnerability. For the family, the loss was recorded as tragic but accidental. For the insurer, the policy was honored. For law enforcement, the incident was closed according to procedure. Yet, even in a case that appeared so conventional, one element stood unresolved. The missing wristwatch, never recovered with the body or boat, remained an unaccounted detail. In the official paperwork, it appeared as a minor omission, not central to cause of death, but its absence quietly stood out against the otherwise orderly documentation. It was an anomaly without explanation, a small discrepancy in a file that otherwise aligned with routine. At the time, no one could imagine that this overlooked item would eventually resurface. The investigation of 1993 ended in conformity with the evidence available. The parish authorities moved forward, satisfied with their conclusions. But in reality, the absence of a single personal object created a silent link between the tragedy on Lake Maurepas and a future discovery years later that would change the classification of the case entirely. In July 1999, more than 6 years after the drowning of Deshaun Harris, a single chance observation reopened a path to a case long considered closed. His sister, Keisha Harris, had traveled to the Outer Banks in North Carolina for a summer vacation. The resort town was busy with seasonal visitors, families and couples enjoying the long stretch of sand. Keisha intended nothing more than a week of relaxation far from Louisiana. Yet her time on that beach would alter the trajectory of a file that had been sitting untouched in the parish archives since 1993. During a crowded afternoon by the shore, Keisha's attention fixed on a figure she recognized. Nia Williams, the widow of her brother, was present in the crowd. Keisha had not seen her sister-in-law in years, not since Nia sold the Harris home and relocated to Atlanta. The sight of her in such a distant place was unexpected, but it was not what commanded full attention. Beside Nia stood a man unfamiliar to Keisha. It was his appearance that turned casual recognition into something else. On his wrist gleamed a gold watch with a bracelet that was anything but ordinary. Kesha had purchased that watch herself in New Orleans as a gift for her brother's 35th birthday. She had requested a custom bracelet, engraved by hand with an African motif and marked with Deshawn's initials on the clasp. The jeweler had made only one. In 1993, when Deshawn's body was recovered, the watch had not been among the documented belongings, and investigators treated it as a lost item. For Kesha, however, it had never been forgotten. The object was unique, and its sudden reappearance in the possession of a stranger raised a contradiction too significant to dismiss. At that moment, memory and recognition aligned. The pattern, the engraving, and the distinct clasp confirmed what she was seeing. The subjective certainty of personal recollection was reinforced by the fact of exclusive manufacture. This was not a mass-market design. There was no possibility of duplication unless ordered deliberately, which she knew had not happened. Kesha understood the implications. If the watch was genuine, it had to have traveled directly from her brother to this man. No legitimate path explained that transfer. Her immediate thoughts cycled through the limited explanations. A recovery by divers, if true, would have generated some form of record, perhaps even a notification to the family. No such information had ever been communicated. The idea of a replica collapsed under the reality that the design was not available in any catalog and had been drawn by hand specifically for Deshawn. The only remaining possibility was that the watch had been taken from him at the time of death and carried forward by someone connected to Nia. The significance of the discovery lay not in the beach encounter itself, but in the potential to create an evidentiary chain. Kesha recognized that her personal testimony would not be enough. Courts required documentation, corroboration, and authoritative verification. To move forward, she needed professionals capable of transforming a visual observation into a body of admissible material. She decided to engage a private investigator in New Orleans, a figure known for working on unresolved cases. The investigator was Marcus Bryant, a former police officer with a background in homicide and cold case review. His task was structured in 3 phases. The first was the confirmation of the watch's uniqueness, that required returning to the jeweler, obtaining the original sketches, photographs of the completed bracelet, receipts, and, most importantly, a notarized affidavit attesting to the fact that no duplicate existed. With that, the watch could be identified in legal proceedings as one-of-a-kind property directly linked to Deshawn Harris. The second phase involved establishing the identity of the man seen with Nia on the beach and determining his relationship to her. The objective was to confirm whether the couple was formally connected, whether they cohabited, and whether their association predated or postdated Deshawn's death. Only through verified records, marriage licenses, residential data, and employment history could that connection be drawn with certainty. The third phase required tracing both Nia and this man back to May 1993 to identify whether they had been present in the vicinity of Lake Morapa. This meant searching for motel registrations, vehicle logs, or boating rental slips from that period, materials that could survive in paper archives even 6 years later. Though the gap of time was significant, such records were often retained for administrative, tax, or liability reasons. Even a single entry could create a link between the supposed accident and those who now appeared tied to Deshawn's missing watch. Kesha's decision to pursue these steps represented a calculated effort to revive the case. She understood that the initial investigation had been closed with the conclusion of accidental drowning, and reopening it would require not just suspicion, but evidence compelling enough to justify state involvement. The watch was not yet a formal exhibit, but in Bryant's hands it could become the foundation for a renewed inquiry. The course of action did not begin with confrontation, but with evidence gathering. Kesha kept silent on the beach, concealing recognition behind composure. Any emotional outburst could have weakened her position. What mattered was not the moment of discovery, but what could be proven. The watch had to move from a fleeting observation to a verifiable fact, something capable of standing in the chain of a criminal case. By the end of that summer, the direction was irreversible. An item dismissed in 1993 as an ordinary loss had surfaced again under circumstances that could not be explained away. The missing watch was no longer just a personal memory. It had become the trigger for reopening a tragedy once labeled accidental. What had vanished with Deshawn at Lake Marapa now pointed directly to two people who 6 years later were living together without fear that the past would return. Marcus Bryant approached the case with the structured discipline of a former homicide detective. His first task was to anchor the watch as a verifiable, unique object. Without establishing its singularity, everything else risked collapsing into conjecture. He returned to the New Orleans jeweler's workshop where the bracelet had been crafted 6 years earlier. The jeweler immediately recognized the piece from his archive. Within his files, he produced the original hand-drawn sketch, a Polaroid photograph of the finished bracelet, and the payment receipt issued to Kesha Harris. Under oath, in the presence of a notary, the jeweler signed a sworn affidavit affirming that no duplicate had ever been produced. He detailed the specific imperfections within the engraving, small irregularities in the carved African motif and micro-scratches on the clasp visible in the photograph. These subtle characteristics established the bracelet as a one-of-a-kind item, the equivalent of a fingerprint in gold. This single affidavit, notarized and preserved, formed the legal backbone of the watch's evidentiary weight. With the authenticity of the object documented, Bryant's next step was to identify the man who had been seen wearing it. Public record searches led him to Rashid Jackson employment logs, confirmed that between 1990 and 1993, he had worked as a bartender in a New Orleans restaurant, known to be one of Deshawn's regular stops with colleagues after work. That connection was significant. It demonstrated access, opportunity for acquaintance, and a plausible overlap with Deshawn's personal environment. Bryant then checked marriage records in Georgia. There, in 1995, he found the official registration of marriage between Nia Williams and Rashid Jackson. This document locked the timeline. 2 years after the supposed accidental death, Nia and Rashid were not only together, but legally united, living as husband and wife. It confirmed that the partnership had endured and raised the clear possibility that it existed even before Deshawn's death. Having confirmed the identity of the man and his legal relationship with Nia, Bryant focused on reconstructing the days surrounding May 15, 1993. That week was critical. Any proof of their presence near Lake Maurepas during that period would alter the closed conclusion of an accident into something deliberate. His investigation led to a former co-worker of Rashid who recalled seeing him with Nia at a roadside motel approximately 10 miles from the lake. Memory alone could not suffice, but Bryant traced the motel's administrative archives. Despite the passage of 6 years, paper logs had been preserved for liability and tax purposes. In those records was an entry dated May 14, 1993. The registration carried the name Michelle Thompson, an alias, but crucially included a room number and a vehicle license plate. That plate matched Nia Williams' car, tying the alias directly to her. This discovery was reinforced by surviving financial documents. Copies of receipts and payment slips associated with that registration showed cash transactions, but retained handwritten notes and identifiers linking them to the guest record. The record provided the first concrete evidence that Nia and Rashid were together under false names in proximity to Lake Maurepas the day before Deshawn disappeared. It converted witness recollection into legally admissible documentation. The chain tightened further when Bryant located boating rental archives from a small marina in a neighboring cove of Lake Maurepas. Dated May 15, 1993, a rental slip listed Rashid Jackson by name. Unlike the motel record, this was not concealed under an alias. The document included the exact time of issue, the assigned hull number of the vessel, and, by procedure, a photocopy of Jackson's driver's license. The clarity of this record left no room for ambiguity. Jackson had taken a boat onto the lake on the very day Deshaun Harris drowned. When placed against the coroner's timeline of death, the match was direct. At this stage, Bryant had constructed a body of evidence far stronger than suspicion. The watch's uniqueness was proven by sworn affidavit. The marriage record tied Nia and Rashid together after 1993. The motel log and corresponding vehicle registration placed them near the scene under a false identity the day before the drowning. The marina rental slip placed Rashid on the water during the critical window. The evidence converged into a coherent pattern that contradicted the narrative of accident accepted 6 years earlier. Recognizing that his authority as a private investigator had limits, Bryant prepared the assembled file for official review. He delivered the package to the district attorney's office of the 21st Judicial District of Louisiana, which held jurisdiction over Livingston Parish. Within his dossier were notarized statements, certified copies of public records, motel logs, rental slips, and background checks. The presentation justified a probable cause assessment for reopening the case as a homicide. The prosecutor's team reviewed the file and agreed the threshold was met. From that point, the case transitioned from private inquiry into state jurisdiction. Subpoenas were issued for financial institutions holding the accounts of Nia Williams and Rashid Jackson. The objective was to determine whether monetary transfers had occurred after the insurance payout. Investigators expected to find transactions that suggested division of proceeds or hidden support payments. Parallel to that, prosecutors obtained a multi-state search warrant authorizing a raid on the couple's residence in Atlanta, coordinated with Georgia law enforcement. This ensured that evidence located outside Louisiana could be seized legally and preserved for court. The strategy rested on strengthening an already solid foundation. The watch had been validated, the geographical links were fixed, and the connection between suspect and victim had been documented. What remained was to trace the flow of money and to seize any physical or photographic evidence showing Rashid in possession of the watch during the intervening years. These elements would transform the anomaly of a missing item into a case of insurance fraud, combined with homicide. By late 1999, the framework was complete. The unique bracelet was no longer a family memory, but a legal exhibit. Motel records and rental slips turned coincidence into corroboration. With subpoenas and warrants in motion, the investigation advanced into its next phase. What had once been a closed drowning file now stood poised to be reclassified as deliberate murder, with the potential to bring both Nia Williams and Rashid Jackson under the weight of criminal charges. Once the compiled material reached the district attorney's office of the 21st Judicial District of Louisiana, the closed file from 1993 was formally reclassified as a homicide investigation. Prosecutors and investigators began with the most traceable lead: financial records. Subpoenas to the banks revealed a sequence of transfers from Nia Williams to Rashid Jackson, beginning only weeks after the $80,000 life insurance policy had been paid out. The transfers were not minor amounts. They represented large sums inconsistent with everyday expenses. Each carried vague notations such as loan repayment or debt settled. To investigators, these labels functioned as camouflage, concealing what was, in effect, the division of illicitly obtained funds. The appearance of financial collaboration so soon after an insurance settlement strengthened the hypothesis of conspiracy. With this monetary link established, the next step was physical evidence from the suspect's residence. A multi-state search warrant was secured and coordination with the Georgia authorities was arranged. Local police accompanied Louisiana investigators to the Atlanta home where Nia and Rashid had lived since their marriage in 1995. The search yielded a range of items: family photo albums, financial binders, notebooks, and electronic storage devices. These were cataloged and sealed for examination. Among the photographs, one detail drew immediate attention. In several images taken in 1994, a year after Deshawn's death, Rashid appeared wearing a wristwatch. Close inspection confirmed it was the same customized bracelet once belonging to Deshawn. The timestamp on the images anchored the fact that Rashid possessed the watch within a year of the drowning. During that period, it was still officially listed as missing property. This discovery transformed the watch from an anomaly into a timeline marker proving illicit possession. The paperwork collected during the search further deepened the case. Copies of wire transfers and handwritten notes of disbursements corresponded directly with the subpoenaed bank statements, confirming that money had passed from Nia to Rashid in deliberate installments. Receipts uncovered during the search showed expenditures for travel and consumer goods far beyond the expected budget of a bar employee and a former homemaker with no independent source of income. Together, these materials painted a picture of financial support inconsistent with declared earnings, reinforcing the conclusion that the insurance payout was being shared. As investigators pieced the evidence together, both suspects were brought in for questioning. During her interrogation, Nia attempted to introduce an alternative explanation for the watch. She claimed that divers had discovered the item during the original recovery operation at Lake Maurepas and had later returned it. This account was checked against the official search protocols from 1993, retrieved from the archives of Livingston Parish and the Louisiana State Search Logs. Those documents clearly stated that no jewelry or wristwatch had been recovered with the body or during subsequent sweeps of the area. Supplementary requests were sent to regional diving clubs that had operated in the early 1990s. None reported a recovery or transfer of such an item. This left Nia's statement unsupported and directly contradicted by existing records. Parallel witness interviews strengthened the case further. Employees from the motel 10 miles from Lake Maurepas confirmed that a couple matching the description of Nia and Rashid had checked in on May 14, 1993, under the false name Michelle Thompson. The surviving registration log included the assigned room number and the license plate of Nia's vehicle, which was entered by the attendant as part of routine procedure. That single numerical detail erased any doubt about the couple's identity. A former co-worker of Rashid added that he had seen them together at the motel and recalled Rashid departing early in the morning, heading in the direction of the lake. This testimony dovetailed with the documentary record, eliminating any suggestion of coincidence. By combining the banking trail, the photographic proof of the watch, the incriminating motel record, and the direct link of the rented boat to Rashid, prosecutors assembled a unified evidentiary structure. Each piece reinforced the others, creating a network of corroboration. Rashid's name on the marina rental slip placed him physically on the water on the day of Deshawn's death. The watch in his possession in 1994 tied him to missing property never recovered. In 1993, financial transfers from Nia demonstrated shared benefit from the insurance payout. The false identity at the motel positioned both suspects together near the crime scene on the eve of the drowning. Faced with this accumulation, Rashid's position grew untenable. Every document and witness statement narrowed the scope of his defense. The prosecution recognized that he represented the weaker link and extended an offer. If he provided a full statement of events implicating both himself and Nia and pled guilty to manslaughter, his sentence would be limited to 25 years. Without cooperation, he risked trial on a charge of second-degree murder, which in Louisiana carried a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. The pressure produced the expected result. Rashid accepted the deal. His admission laid out the planning, the execution, and the motive behind the death of Deshaun Harris. For investigators, his testimony closed the gaps that documents alone could not fill. For Nia, it was a direct accusation from her closest accomplice, one that made her defense significantly more difficult. With this confession secured, the prosecution finalized the charging documents. Nia Williams was indicted for second-degree murder based on both the corroborated circumstantial evidence and Rashid's direct testimony. The collected materials, bank records, photographs, receipts, motel logs, rental forms, and sworn statements, were assembled into the case file and prepared for presentation in court. The path from a long archived accident file to a homicide indictment had been completed. The matter now moved from investigation into the judicial process where evidence would be tested and responsibility formally assigned. According to the sworn testimony of Rashid Jackson and the corroborating evidence gathered over months of renewed investigation, the events that culminated in the death of Deshaun Harris were neither accidental nor unforeseen. They had roots in a relationship that began quietly in 1992 when Nia Williams, then the wife of a well-positioned executive from a wealthy family, initiated an affair with Jackson, a bartender working at one of the restaurants frequented by her husband. The relationship grew in secrecy, hidden behind layers of routine and everyday appearances. It was this affair that became the foundation for a decision far more severe than divorce. The legal framework of Nia's marriage dictated the limits of her future. In 1990, she and Deshaun had signed a prenuptial agreement that left her with no claim to his estate or assets in the event of separation. Deshaun came from an affluent background, and his family's wealth was secured through that contract. For Nia, it meant that a divorce would end the marriage without providing her with financial independence. This legal reality, combined with her clandestine relationship with Jackson, created a powerful motive. In March of 1993, only 2 months before Deshaun's death, she arranged for a substantial life insurance policy in his name, valued at $80,000. The timing of this policy was not incidental. It provided a financial incentive where none had previously existed. By May, the plan moved from theory to execution. On May 14, 1993, Nia and Rashid checked into a motel located approximately 10 miles from Lake Maurepas. They used the false name Michelle Thompson, a detail intended to obscure their presence, but recorded with enough identifying data to later tie it back to Nia through her vehicle registration. The motel served as their base of operations. It kept them close to the lake while providing a measure of privacy away from neighborhoods where their association might be recognized. The next morning, May 15th, Deshaun left for his fishing trip, as he had done many times before. Alone in his boat, he navigated toward the quiet areas of the lake, surrounded by reeds and trees where interruptions were rare. It was there that Jackson, having rented a small boat from a nearby marina under his own name and presenting his identification, positioned himself to make contact. The rental slip, preserved in the marina's archives, decades later, marked the time and hull number of the vessel he used. When Jackson reached the secluded area, the conditions were favorable for concealment. The overcast weather kept other fishermen scarce, and the reeds shielded visibility from open water. Approaching Deshaun, Jackson struck him with the wooden oar. The blow produced a bruise, but not a fatal injury, just enough to disorient and disable. With Deshaun stunned and unable to defend himself, Jackson removed the distinctive gold wristwatch from his arm, keeping it as both trophy and possession. He then forced Deshaun into the water and overturned the boat, leaving behind a scene that would appear to any investigator as the chaotic result of an accident. Having staged the drowning, Jackson returned to the motel. Later that evening, Nia went back to her home, ensuring her car would be visible to neighbors. From there, she phoned the police to report her husband's failure to return from fishing. The report triggered the standard search operation, which recovered the overturned boat quickly, but not the body, until 2 days later. On May 17th, Deshawn was found. The autopsy documented the contusion on his temple, but classified it as consistent with an accidental impact against the boat during a fall. The lungs were filled with water, confirming drowning, and the toxicology showed no intoxicants. Without further indicators, the death was certified as accidental. The facade held. In the months following the funeral, Nia collected the life insurance payout. Bank records later revealed how she transferred portions of that sum to Rashid, labeling them as repayments of debt. Their financial arrangements disguised the true purpose, but allowed them both to benefit. By 1994, Rashid no longer concealed his possession of the watch. Photographs from that year showed him wearing it openly, a mistake that would later provide tangible proof of his involvement. The following year, 1995, Nia and Rashid married in Atlanta, formalizing their partnership and starting a new life funded by the proceeds of the crime. The reconstruction built by investigators combined Jackson's confession with a network of corroborating documents: the motel log with Nia's vehicle information, the marina's rental slip bearing Jackson's name, the photographs from 1994 displaying the watch, and the banking records of transfers between them. Each element formed part of a closed circuit, motive derived from the prenuptial agreement and financial desperation, preparation demonstrated by the motel registration and life insurance policy, execution confirmed by the boating rental and the medical anomalies at the autopsy, and aftermath revealed through the money trail and photographs. In 1993, the same sequence appeared indistinguishable from a tragic accident. The missing watch was treated as a trivial absence, the bruise explained as incidental, and the widow's claim validated without contradiction. But with the recovery of the watch years later, the overlooked inconsistencies gained new context. What once fit the narrative of an accident was reframed as a deliberate act of homicide. By 1999, the watch seen on Rashid's wrist in public served as the trigger that allowed the entire crime to be reconstructed. It showed that Deshawn's death had not been the result of misfortune on the lake, but the outcome of a calculated plan motivated by financial gain and carried out in secrecy. With every supporting document, investigators restored the truth, transforming an archived drowning into a prosecutable murder case. By the year 2000, the case that had begun as an apparent drowning on Lake Maurepas reached the courtroom of the 21st Judicial District of Louisiana. The indictment against Nia Williams carried the charge of second-degree murder, a classification that under state law meant a mandatory life sentence at hard labor without the possibility of parole if convicted. The prosecution entered the proceedings with a structured presentation of evidence designed to transform what had once been an accident report into a proven homicide. Central to the state's case was the testimony of Rashid Jackson, who had already entered into a plea agreement. His admission, recorded in detail and corroborated by multiple documents, provided the narrative framework. He described the affair with Nia, the financial motive rooted in the prenuptial agreement and the insurance policy, and the events of May 15, 1993, when he confronted Deshawn Harris on the lake. His words were not presented in isolation, but reinforced by tangible exhibits that gave his confession material weight. The jeweler's notarized affidavit confirmed that the gold bracelet had been produced as a single unique piece. The original sketches, receipts, and Polaroid images were introduced as supporting documentation, eliminating any possibility that the watch worn by Rashid years later was a replica. Witnesses from the motel took the stand to verify the May 14th registration under the alias Michelle Thompson, connecting Nia's vehicle to the false name. A former co-worker of Rashid confirmed that he had seen the couple at the motel, with Jackson departing the following morning toward the direction of the lake. The marina's rental log, signed by Jackson, was read into evidence, establishing his presence on the water during the critical window. Financial records formed another pillar of the prosecution's case. Bank subpoenas revealed a trail of transfers from Naya to Rashid following the insurance payout. The sums were significant and recurrent, marked as loan repayments, but inconsistent with any documented loan. These transactions were paired with receipts recovered in the Atlanta home, which demonstrated expenditures well beyond the couple's legitimate means. Photographs seized during the search were projected for the jury, showing Rashid wearing the bracelet in 1994. The images carried date stamps that fixed the timeline, proving his possession of an item reported missing from Deshawn at the time of death. The defense attempted to undermine the state's evidence by introducing the theory that divers may have recovered the watch during the initial search and later returned it to Naya. To test this claim, prosecutors submitted the official dive protocols from May 1993, retrieved from the Livingston Parish Archives and the State Search Unit. These logs made no mention of recovered jewelry or wristwatch. Supplemental requests to diving organizations confirmed that no such recovery was ever reported. With this contradiction, the diver theory was discredited. Another defense effort focused on reframing the financial transfers as the repayment of personal debts. This claim failed against the chronological reality. The payments coincided directly with the insurance settlement and continued in patterns that matched the couple's shared expenses. The receipts of luxury purchases and travel strengthened the prosecution's stance that these were not repayments, but the division of insurance proceeds. After weeks of testimony and presentation, the evidence was considered in its entirety. The court recognized the alignment of Jackson's testimony with the documentary record. The unique bracelet, the falsified motel entry, the rental slip, the photographs, and the bank transfers interlocked into a coherent structure that portrayed deliberate planning and execution. The court of the 21st Judicial District of Louisiana found Nia Williams guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Jackson, having pled guilty to manslaughter under the negotiated agreement, received a 25-year prison term. The discrepancy in sentencing reflected the prosecutorial strategy. His cooperation had provided the confession and details that secured the conviction of his accomplice. Following the criminal verdicts, the insurance company pursued civil remedies. A lawsuit was filed to recover the $80,000 paid under what was now proven to be a fraudulent claim. The court ruled in favor of the insurer, ordering restitution. A portion of the reclaimed funds was redirected as compensation to the Harris family, acknowledging their loss and the years of misrepresentation that followed the original ruling of accidental death. For Kesha Harris, the verdict closed a personal chapter of suspicion and grief that had endured for 7 years. What began with the sight of a watch on a beach in North Carolina had evolved into the unraveling of a carefully concealed crime. In the aftermath, she established a nonprofit foundation dedicated to supporting families of victims in unsolved cases. The organization started with local initiatives in Louisiana, offering resources and advocacy, and expanded into other states, building networks to address the gaps that left many cases unresolved. The final judgment stood as both a legal resolution and a restoration of justice. It confirmed that the death of Deshawn Harris was not a random accident on the waters of Lake Maurepas, but the outcome of calculated deceit and financial ambition. The ruling of the court, coupled with the restitution of funds and the establishment of Kesha's foundation, ensured that the case would be remembered not only for its crime, but for the way persistence and detail had brought accountability to those responsible. The transformation from a seemingly routine drowning to a complex murder conspiracy demonstrated how small, overlooked details could eventually unravel even the most carefully planned deceptions. The custom watch, initially dismissed as simply another item lost to the lake's depths, became the crucial thread that, when pulled, unwound an entire web of lies. For the law enforcement officials who had originally investigated the case, the revelation served as a sobering reminder of the importance of thoroughly documenting every detail. No matter how insignificant it might appear at the time, the missing timepiece that had been noted but not pursued became the cornerstone of a murder conviction 7 years later. The case also highlighted the evolving nature of criminal investigations. What appeared conclusive in 1993 was reopened and re-examined through new evidence and fresh perspectives. The archived file that seemed permanently closed was given new life through the determination of a grieving sister and the methodical work of a skilled private investigator. Bryant's systematic approach to building the case demonstrated the value of treating each piece of evidence as part of a larger puzzle. The notarized affidavit from the jeweler, the motel registration logs, the marina rental records, and the financial transactions all contributed to a comprehensive picture that no single piece of evidence could have provided alone. The prosecution's success also relied heavily on the cooperation of Rashid Jackson, whose plea agreement provided the detailed narrative that connected all the documentary evidence. His testimony filled in the gaps that circumstantial evidence alone could not address, providing the court with a clear understanding of how the crime was planned and executed. The case served as a precedent for other cold case investigations throughout Louisiana, and beyond it demonstrated that even years after a case had been closed, new evidence could emerge that would justify reopening an investigation. The precedent encouraged other families of victims to persist in seeking answers, even when official channels had been exhausted. For insurance investigators, the case became a textbook example of how fraudulent claims could be constructed and later exposed. The careful timing of the policy purchase, the substantial payout amount, and the subsequent financial transfers all became red flags that future investigators would be trained to recognize and pursue. The transformation of the case from accident to homicide also had implications for how water-related deaths were investigated. The Harris case prompted reviews of other similar cases where personal items had gone missing and where the circumstances, while appearing accidental, contained unexplained elements that had been previously overlooked. In the years following the conviction, Kesha Harris's foundation grew into a significant resource for families dealing with unsolved cases. The organization provided not only emotional support but also practical assistance in navigating the complex legal and investigative processes involved in reopening cold cases. The Foundation's work extended beyond individual cases to advocacy for policy changes that would improve how missing persons cases and unexplained deaths were handled by law enforcement agencies. Their efforts led to enhanced training programs for investigators and improved protocols for documenting and preserving evidence in cases that might initially appear straightforward. The legacy of Deshaun Harris's case continued to influence criminal justice practices long after the courtroom proceedings had concluded. It stood as a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of detailed documentation, and the potential for justice to be served even when it seemed that all avenues had been exhausted. The story of the custom watch that traveled from a New Orleans jewelry shop to a Louisiana lake, then to a North Carolina beach, and finally to a courtroom as evidence in a murder trial, became a reminder that in criminal investigations, no detail is too small to matter, and no case is ever truly closed until all questions have been answered.